When we look at the Suns, though, what difference do you think a coach can make here? And these hastily constructed kind of super team, these relics of a previous team building generation, it feels like, Wes, even though the Suns just built this one last year. Where does a coach fall into that for you? Do you think this move makes them substantially different, whether it's good, bad, more offense, more defense, whatever? How much do you think this matters?
Look, if Budenholzer's a good coach, and I don't mean to take anything away from him, but Frank Vogel was also a good coach. Now, I think Coach Bud is more of an offensive-leaning guy, and Vogel is more of a defensive-leaning guy. So you're kind of replacing one established coach that leans one direction with another one that leans another direction. And I think Phoenix had issues on both sides of the ball last year, and all those issues stem from a lack of continuity. And now the Suns are moving on to their third head coach in 3 years. Like, that doesn't exactly speak to continuity. And, if the reporting is accurate that Frank Vogel was asking for a point guard before the season, didn't get it, and you look at sort of the disorganization parts of that offense and it wasn't a point guard, then, I don't know that putting a new coach in there helps. I just think that the defense is going to fall off no matter what. And you and I talked about this at the end of when the Suns were eliminated. I don't think coaching was the issue. I don't think that adding pieces to the roster is necessarily going to be helpful, helpful enough, considering the limitations that they have to add players to the roster, right? Like finding a way to go get that point guard who's not some sort of veteran minimum guy. They don't have a mid-level exception. They don't have all these things. They can't aggregate contracts. They're all these stipulations because they're a second apron team. To me, this team just needs buy-in. And I don't know that Frank Vogel or any other coach in the history of basketball can get this team with these personalities, with this many holes in the roster, to buy in, right? Because now you're asking basically Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal to perform over their head defensively and to play out of position offensively. I don't think any of them want to do it. To me, this is a roster concern. And I understand the firing of Frank Vogel. Like, I totally get it. Just because I don't know what other option Phoenix had. But because you had to make some sort of change. And the roster is just what it is. So anything other than blowing it up, this was sort of the only option that they had. But I don't think it's going to materially change anything if the players aren't buying into something greater.
Yeah, the way I've kind of put it is like, there's this whole conversation now after Denver wins last year and, even Minnesota, Oklahoma City, some of these groups that have, I guess you would even say Boston, even though they have a super team of their own variety, it's just not a three-headed monster, is like, does that model work anymore? And the way that I've been thinking about how it could, just making a best-case scenario for the Suns with some of the concerns that you're obviously right on with, is that the big three need to play less like star players, right? And I think Durant in particular, like, he is a guy that I think there is a version of him, even in his mid-30s, where he can be a better rebounder, a better help defender who creates blocks and steals with his length and his size and his IQ, who occasionally can get stops one-on-one if he's not having to do everything on offense and, maybe in big playoff moments can be a stopper of sorts for you. We saw at times Bradley Beal be kind of the point of attack defender. I mean, he was guarding Ant. Good, not much highlight reel footage that you're going to want to show from that try, but he did it. He walked the ball up the floor and theoretically was playing point guard, which was an adjustment and a sacrifice for him. But they need to do all that stuff all the time, every day. Be those players, embrace that role. And so I agree. I think the coach that you pick, that's priority number one, not whatever you're going to scheme up. Like, you can pick holes in their offense should have been closer to top 3 than just top 10, or maybe there is a little more threes they can take and just a mentality shift in terms of that could go a long way, or
right.
Whatever. But I just look at it and I don't look at Mike Budenholzer, Wes, as a guy that the players probably picked here. So this, to me, if it's him, it looks like management and ownership once again saying this is the guy that's going to lead you. And
for a year.
Yeah,
right?
For another year, right? But it's like, at what point, it's this weird thing that you run into, and it's another byproduct of building a team this way, where you don't want to, you want to put a cap on how much say and influence the players can have. But once you let that genie out of the bottle, I'm not really sure you can put it back. And so, like, I've even been sitting here like, if Chauncey Billups leaves in Portland, could he actually be more desirable to the players than a Mike Budenholzer? Just because of what Chauncey Billups is, it's all going to boil down to what those guys want and what they'll embrace. And I don't know if this change actually will get them there.
So again, I don't know if we're just chasing our tail here because you and I kind of agree that maybe the coaching isn't as important as a lot of the other things that have to do with the star players. And you're absolutely right. We keep pointing them as the first thing, but there was a coaching change and it's worth talking about it. I disagree with you on the point of maybe they would have bought in a little bit more if they picked their own guy, because we saw this with Kevin Durant. He picked his own guy and then didn't respect him, and Steve Nash. Like, he's picked his own guy several times and did not respect that person. And that tends to be the case with star players. When they pick their guy, it almost feels like the player thinks that the coach works for him and not the other way around.
Yeah.
And there's not necessarily that level of
Shout out Kyrie Irving.
Right. And so I don't have a problem with getting a guy with real bona fides and a championship in Budenholzer to come in and tell him how to do things. But they just did that with Frank Vogel, and it didn't work.
Yeah.
And I kind of do like the idea, like just as a thought exercise of, okay, so Mike Budenholzer had his success with the Milwaukee Bucks, won a championship in 2021, beat the Suns. Actually, I just made that connection, so that's a little interesting way of things happening. So let's plug in the current Suns roster into those roles that he had. If we're talking about needing more continuity and more established roles and a hierarchy and all these things that the Suns do need. Okay, well, Nurkic could do a Brook Lopez impression in terms of dropping back defensively by the rim.
Yeah.
Maybe he
on
shoots
defense,
a few more threes, something like that. I don't know. They're both very good screen setters. They're both good passers. Nurkic probably a little bit better passer than Lopez. Lopez a better shooter than Nurkic. Whatever. He could play that role. Kevin Durant, help defender, weak side guy, the way that Giannis can be. That makes sense to me. Devin Booker even. In terms of just like an amped up Chris Middleton, just like a hooper. Let me just be deadly from the mid-range, run some second side pick and roll, get Kevin Durant involved a little bit here, make things easy on him. And then, I don't know, you got Grayson Allen, so that's good. So that just sort of is a plug and play. But I do struggle to see where Bradley Beal fits in. Like, he's not going to be Drew Holiday, but can you get a healthier Bradley Beal? I don't know. He played 53 games this year, 50 games the year before that, 40 games the year before that. This tends to be how many games he plays. But maybe you can get 65 games from Bradley Beal next season. Well, that's 12 more games than he was available. And you've got another year and a playoff series worth of those three guys playing together, which is 1,000,000,000% more than what they had going into this season. So if you want to talk yourself into it, you can.
Yeah.
But then you realize that Kevin Durant does not want to be Giannis. Nurkic is not even close to Brook Lopez. Devin Booker does not want to be Chris Middleton, right? Like, these guys, like, the whole, like, the Bradley Beal thing is a weird fit. Like, he needs to basically change his game completely in order to fit in with these other two guys. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not impossible because the talent is there, and that's the thing. I just don't know. And maybe it's just a new voice, and whatever it is, there'll just be a refresh and a reset, and maybe they all just kind of look in the mirror and they say, you know what, this is what we got to do, because we don't want to be working for another coach a year from now after we just did this thing. So I don't know. We'll see. I'm not ruling it out of the possibility because the talent is there, but I'm not any more optimistic now than I was when they had Frank Vogel either.
No, I don't think you really could be. You mentioned the pressure on the players and what might be that factor to get them to adjust. I mean, they might not be on the team if things don't go well this season, right? So, and have maybe less control of their destiny by way of being less desirable assets at the end of the day. Not Booker probably, but Durant and Beal. It's like, you're that expensive as on a contract, and you're aging and injury concerns and everything else. Like, you got to kind of make the situation you made for yourself work at a certain point. So I think you would be hoping that happens. They all talked about continuity coming off the season, and they're not going to get that now, right? The three of them might, and there's certainly gains to be made, and some of the other personnel that might stick around. But this move reshuffles the deck again, and it's the same as you said. It's maybe the only obvious move, but it's still yet another in a franchise that cannot stop making change, another change. Here's another place we might disagree, though, because when I look at Budenholzer, Wes, I see one of the best attributes I could find about how he's molded winning teams out of the rosters he's gotten to work with in Atlanta and in Milwaukee, his point guards, quote unquote, were Jeff Teague and Drew Holiday. I do think there's something to be said for the kind of egalitarian, balanced offenses that he's been able to put together, being a better fit for Phoenix than Vogel, who doesn't really have an offense at the end of the day. But the best thing you could say about Vogel is he kind of just caters to what his stars want to do. Well, that seemed to get in the Suns' way. So maybe a little more plan of action on that end of the floor can get them to their true identity, which I've always thought since they got the roster together, forget who the coach was, is be one of the absolute best offenses we've ever seen and be good enough on defense. Bud feels more like trending in that direction, and so I guess that's a case you can make.
That's fair.
But you said you think they need a point guard. I'm not fully on board with that as much as I think a lot of people are. Is that just because of how ugly it looked, or do you think the players on the roster can't fill that role?
I'm not necessarily. Yeah, I think you and I are closer to this than maybe I let on there. I don't think they needed just a point guard. I think if they had like a legit point guard in the Bradley Beal place, they would be better. But you could also argue that even that player is just an upgrade in terms of talent and health and availability than Bradley Beal. Like that's an easy one. I don't know that this team needs to go out there and just get Tyus Jones, right? I don't think that necessarily helps this team. Somebody needs to just be the point guard on the roster. Somebody needs to embrace that role and say, you know what? I'm going to get everybody else to eat. I'm going to be a facilitator first, and I'm going to be the guy who's unselfish and taking that step back. And I don't know that we necessarily saw that outside of just for spurts. I think we saw that from Devin Booker for the beginning of the season. I thought we saw it in instances from Beal. Heck, we've even seen that from Durant from time to time. Durant's not really a natural playmaker. But somebody's just got to kind of put that on their shoulders and be like, you know what? I'm wearing this for an entire season. I'm going to do it. And they just need somebody to step up in that way. And it probably has to be one of their stars that has to do it.
The mistakes I think you saw this team make that led people to believe that, which is playing slow, the fourth quarter numbers were just terrible. They were by far the worst plus-minus team in the fourth quarter. Like, they dug themselves so deep a hole in the first half of the season, no one was going to catch up. And the turnover numbers, I frankly just think all of that is another thing you put on the star players. Like, get out of your own way, play more organized basketball, and don't make mental mistakes. And a lot of those things aren't there, and we're probably talking about a point guard a lot less.
Yep.
Bradley Beal basically played point guard for the Wizards his last season there, 2 regular seasons ago now. They had Monte Morris on the team. He didn't play a ton. DeLon Wright played over there a lot. And it was like Kuzma and Porzingis also handling the ball. Like, it wasn't that different of a situation from what he came into in Phoenix. The Westbrook year, obviously, maybe, with Wall, some of those years,
John Wall earlier,
he might have had the ball less. But he's done all of that. Booker has done all of that. Durant has done all of that. So I think, like you said, if you're getting another guy who's a more traditional point guard, you're probably just putting a worse player on the court than a Grayson Allen or
and you're losing size,
even a Royce O'Neal.
This team's already not that big in the first place. I think this team needs more size, more than it needs a traditional point guard. They just need somebody to step up and be the guy who wants to get everybody else involved. Going back to the three-point shooting, you're absolutely right. That was such a dumb thing that was happening with the Suns this year, is not taking enough threes. Mike Budenholzer is the guy in Milwaukee who painted on their practice court or taped off zones where, hey, this is where you stand, this is how we space the floor, and this is where you shoot from. It worked in Milwaukee. We'll see if it works in Phoenix. The thing is, and it goes back to your original point, that you need your stars not to necessarily play like stars, is I think that Durant, Beal, and Booker too often looked at the other role players and said, you're the ones that have to rebound, you're the ones that have to defend, and you know what? You're also the ones that have to take threes and space the floor for us. Because I'm Kevin Durant. I love my mid-range jumpers. I'm Devin Booker. I'm a hooper, man. I love my mid-range jumpers. I'm Bradley Beal. I'm a hooper, man. I love my mid-range jumpers. Like, all these guys love that mid-range area, and they were awesome in the mid-range area. But all these guys would also be awesome from three-point range, almost equally so. And I do wonder if Mike Budenholzer tapes off areas of the Phoenix Suns practice court and says, stand here, if the three stars look at him and be like, the hell you're talking to? So we'll see, right? That's going to be part of Budenholzer's biggest job, is getting that buy-in, showing these guys the vision. And the vision has worked. It has worked for Budenholzer. It has worked for other teams. If he explains the math to them, those guys are all really smart, and hopefully they'll realize it. But it's also just another thing to get guys to work out of their comfort zone that they've been in for a decade plus in the NBA. So TBD.
Yeah,
It'll be interesting. I think this is, if you were going to fire Vogel and hire somebody, Budenholzer is as good as you can get. And so I guess a hat tip for that. I still remain weirdly bullish on Phoenix because I tend to believe in talent. But we're going beyond the coaching stuff, and you and I keep kind of coming back to the same thing. You got to get buy-in. You got to get buy-in from these stars, and ultimately they decide if they want to buy in or not.